presentation. You just have a few more hip questions to ask, to answer, like a little 20-question hip quiz tonight, and the matching for the respiratory system, which is chapter 28, which makes sense because we just did cardiovascular and all that good stuff, and we want you to know. And oh shoot, that reminds me, Miss McDowell, no, I still don't know about the thing because I didn't study it, but I will figure it out about the lipids. I know, but I'm curious. Anyway, all right. So, what we're going to do, though, is talk about this guy. What I want to do, because we have time, is talk about some of the muscles that you all know already go here, but kind of talk about generalities of where they go and what that means, so that you are familiar with a roadmap as we bore in and get more and more fine detail, that you've got some of the general detail. And if you think about it, this has been our game plan all along. When you guys first came on board, there was lots of like, how many adductors are there? You know, what are their names? And we're still doing that because we want you to always have that information in your head. But now we're going to be a little bit more specific about where are they? And then as we do them as individual muscles, we'll be really specific. Like exactly what part of the bone do they hook on. But this is going to just give us a way to kind of put all this information into folders in our brain. So, we've got the hips here. Let's see. Let's get them as close to as we can. Boom. All right. You might want to pin me to your screen so that you can see all this glorious action as good as possible. There. Okay. All right. So, we're going to go over a lot of muscles in this section that might be of interest to you, so you can kind of get a feel for how they work and things of that nature. We will go over all these muscles individually later in this chapter, I promise. This is an overview. The idea was you studied some of the bumps on the hips, so now we can talk about them and we can talk about what muscles go where. And then later when we go back and study those muscles, we'll get really nitpicky about where they go. So not everything today is going to be down to the millimeter, but it will give you a really good idea of how to think about this stuff. Okay? All right. So let's turn this skeleton around first, and we are going to look at the posterior side of the skeleton. Posterior side of the skeleton. And there are certain features back here that I am very interested in. One is as I follow the crest of the ilium, back, I reach a bump here. Does anybody know the name of this bump as I follow the ilium back to get to this first bump that's right here? Right here on both these sides, actually. Anybody know the name of that bump that is on the back side of the ilium above another little bump down here? This one's above. Yes, Miss McDowell?
Is that the posterior superior iliac spine?
It is. Your posterior superior iliac spine. Let's break that down for people. This is your ilium. This bone is your ilium. A spine is something sticking out on it. You've got two spines in back on this one and two in front. So she said posterior in back, superior up, iliac spine. The bump found on the back and up of the ilium. That's all she said. Does that make sense? Good. So somebody else tell me why I'm obsessed with this bump here. What do I use it to find? Because I use it to find something else. This iliac, posterior, superior, iliac spine, I use to find something else. And who just did? Oh, yes, Mr. Placencia, please, sir.
The sacral parent got the name. There's a joint in there.
Yes, the sacral forgot the name joint in there. Yes, the sacroiliac joint. He's exactly right. The joint between the sacrum and the ilium is the sacroiliac joint. You're dead on right, though, sir. Why is this joint of fascination to Mr. Tapscott and other massage therapists, by the way, too?
Joins your appendicular skeleton to your axial skeleton.
Yeah, everybody. The axial skeletal system was the skull, the rib cage, and the spine and the sacrum. This is where the legs hook on to that. The appendicular skeletal system hooks onto the axial skeletal system, which means if you pick up a pencil with your hand, all that weight eventually has to get distributed through one of these SI joints down to the floor. It just works that way. That's the way it is structurally. So it's a super important high tension area. They don't move a lot, but there is movement in that SI joint, and so we care about that. So that's a really important feature. Cool. All right. We are going to talk about some of the deep lying structures here and kind of build up from there. So we've got to start deep here because I'll put tape on things otherwise. One of the first things that we like to be able to do is locate some of the deep six hip rotator muscles that are all found down in this area right here. They're all found down here underneath the gluteus maximus. Can somebody tell me the name of the deep six lateral hip rotators? Mr. Blygen, sir.
The deep six hip rotators, we have the piriformis,
Yep.
obturator superior,
Obturator externus.
externus, the gemellus superior,
Yep.
obturator externus,
Yeah.
gemellus inferior,
Yep.
and the quadratus femoris.
Yes. Everybody, what's very impressive about what Mr. Blygen just did is he not only listed the deep six lateral hip rotators, but if it sounded weird how he listed them from superior to inferior. So, the first thing he listed off was the piriformis. Piriformis.
Before you go on, I remember the acronym POGO.
Pogo.
I don't know why that helps, but that helps. That helps.
You know what helped me?
From,
What helped me, sir, was when you told me you have to go in before you go out.
last semester we talked about that.
Yeah, it was cool. All right, everybody. If I make, you know how your sacrum is kind of like a triangle? If I make a T with the edge of your sacrum, the top of a T here, this bottom part of the T of a capital T is your piriformis. This is how you find people's piriformis. You make a T with the edge of their sacrum, and then this thing coming off it at a right angle down to the top of the greater trochanter here. This is your piriformis. This is your piriformis. And just to give you guys a rough idea, this is your quadratus femoris, which means the obturator internus, gemellus superior, obturator externus, gemellus inferior all fit right in here. Yeah. And let me give you a couple of other visuals. Remember how there are holes in your hips, right? Well, the obturator internus really comes from inside your hip, covering this hole from inside your hip, and really goes over here. The obturator externus comes from the outside of that hole and comes over here. That's why they're called that. Cool? But they all live right in here. So this is where the deep six are. And this should just be overview for you, but I want you to have a place to put stuff inside your head. And we've been doing a lot of bow and arrow stretching when we work this. We move the leg around and get our fist in here to rotate these guys and work them out. Yes. Mr. Blygen, you still have your hand up. Did you have more to say, sir? Maybe, maybe not. No? Just psyching me out, huh, buddy? That's all right. Yep. I can do this all day. All right. So, over the top of this, we've got a really big muscle. Could be arguably the largest muscle in your body, but it depends on how you count that. Anybody know the big muscle over the top of this?
Gluteus maximus.
Yeah, gluteus maximus comes over the top. Kind of like that. That's fairly accurate. So, it covers up your deep six. And you actually have to go through the gluteus maximus to get to the deep six lateral hip rotators. And the gluteus maximus is back here. It runs at a slight angle, which means it can do two things. One is it can extend, hold the leg back, extend it. It can also laterally rotate it. because it can pull back from the side of your leg and actually rotate your hips out, which you use when you walk, believe it or not. Miss McDowell, please.
I know that everybody's different, but in terms of like generalizations, how like thick actually is that muscle? Is that what you mean by like biggest, as in like thickest, or
Yeah.
what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean total volume. You're right, it's a very hard thing to talk about. So you've got muscles that are longer, but we basically mean it's massive. You're right, the thickness of it and such. You're absolutely right. It's probably the thickest muscle back there. I also assume, but I don't know, that if you weighed it, it's one of the heaviest muscles back there. So we're talking total volume. But you're right, you've got things like your sartorius that are super duper long, but they're super duper thin. But so yeah, that's what I mean though. I mean big in the sense of total volume.
Okay.
And which would be in this case a lot of thickness. And I mean, and look at people's bottoms. They're tushies. They're round. They've got a lot of they got a lot of meat back there. So yeah. Anyway, because if this was a glute, it would actually come out quite a bit. So we know they're pretty thick. Yeah. Okay, so that's gluteus maximus. If I go a little bit more anterior, what comes next? Anybody? Somebody new? If I go a little bit more anterior, this gluteus maximus, what goes here?
Gluteus medius.
Thank you, ma'am. And believe it or not, everybody, I probably should have done it first. It goes a little bit under the maximus, but it's down like this. Thank you. Thank you, Miss Vincent. Okay. And if I go still further forward, what I run into? Anybody? But I can call on you guys if you want. Yes, Miss Sarno.
Ten first. I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah. So you're going to say tensor fascia lata.
Yes.
So tensor
Tensor,
fascia
fascia,
lata.
lata.
And I think other people say it different than me too. I've heard people say tensor fascia latte. But anyway, tensor fascia lata. You're basically right, guys. There is a gluteus minimus down in here too. But if I kept going forward, she's right. Right up here is the tensor fascia lata that goes kind of like that. Now, because it's in front, everybody, it actually acts as a hip flexor. It's one of the things it does. But what's more significant in my mind is the gluteus maximus and the tensor fascia lata come together like this. Do you see how they triangulate to hook to the IT band? Triangulation is a common theme in the human body when it comes to architectural design. So you've got this thing that can tense up the IT band here, the gluteus maximus can tense it down here, and the IT band runs across your knee and helps you keep you from laterally blowing out your knee. So that's kind of a cool little feature there. Cool? All right. Let's keep going around to the front here because there's some other neat features. Now, if I follow the ilium, the iliac crest forward, I also run into a bump here and a bump down here. So if I follow the iliac crest forward, Mr. Riedel. Mr. Riedel, sir, if I follow the iliac crest forward, what's this first bump I come to? I'll help you, sir, if you want.
Okay.
Cool. Is this anterior or posterior?
That's anterior.
Yes. So is this above, or if this is above the other bump? So what's the word for above?
Superior.
Yes. So this is the anterior superior. What bone is this?
Is that the ilium?
Yes. So anterior superior iliac spine. Spine just means bump in this case. Cool?
Cool.
Cool. All right. So everybody, underneath the anterior superior iliac spine is obviously the anterior inferior iliac spine. Your rectus femoris, which is one of your quads, likes to hook to that one. It is your quad muscle that goes across the hip there. Hold on 1 second. All right, then. Yes, Miss Walker, why?
You said it attaches to the anterior, superior, or inferior?
The rectus femoris actually attaches to, and don't worry, we're going to do it separate and talk about it more, but the rectus femoris actually attaches to the anterior inferior iliac spine, so below. And for that reason, by the way, Miss Walker, you will probably never feel this bump here. It's below too many other things. You can easily, on your own body right now, and probably anybody else's in this entire class, find their anterior superior iliac spine. It's a little bump poking out in front of their hip. But this one is even further down and it's more in because the way people's hips tilt. So anyway, this is the only of your 4 quad muscles that actually hooks to the hip. The other one's hooked to the leg only. And that is significant, everybody, because if we take this leg here and we give it a really big muscle on the side, maybe a vastus lateralis, and a big muscle in the middle, vastus intermedius, and a big muscle on the medial side, vastus medialis, we've got the 4 quads, but only does the rectus femoris go across the hip, which means the rectus femoris can also flex your hip, whereas the other ones just move your knee. Cool. What does attach to the anterior superior iliac spine? Anybody? Miss Walker, you still have your hand raised. Does that mean you want to answer? No.
Actually, no.
Okay, I wouldn't expect you to know, by the way.
Okay.
I mean, I wouldn't expect anybody to know, not you in particular, ma'am.
Is it the adductors that attach on that bump?
No, but I like where you're going. You're going to find the adductors like to hook on down here at your pubis and your ischium. There is a single lone muscle that likes to attach to this guy, and he goes diagonal across your leg and into your pes anserinus. This, everybody, is your sartorius. Your sartorius is not part of your quads, it's not part of your hamstrings, it's not part of your adductors, it's not part of your TFL. It is a diagonal muscle that runs extremely superficial. It is the most superficial muscle. It is so superficial that some massage therapists rub up a leg, catch it and pop over it and think that it's a knot. And it's not. It's just a long strap muscle here. What does this muscle do? I will demonstrate for you guys. It actually flexes my hip while laterally rotating my leg while flexing my knee so I can sit cross-legged. That's why it's nicknamed the tailor's muscle, because it lets me sit and sew. That's how tailors sit, apparently. Anyway, that's the sartorius. While we're in front here, let's talk about some stuff that's deep, deep inside. Anybody remember the iliopsoas? No. Good. Okay. The iliopsoas is actually 2 muscles, the iliacus and the psoas major. Why do they refer to them together? Because they both go to the same place and they both do roughly the same thing. Remember how I said anytime I say latissimus dorsi, you say teres major? Anytime I say infraspinatus, you say teres minor? Anytime I say iliacus, you'd say psoas major iliacus. They refer to them together and they call them the iliopsoas. Again, we're going to do them separately. Don't worry, this is just overview. But the iliacus is named that way because it is inside your iliac fossa. It goes down to something called your lesser trochanter. I'm going to show it to you on this leg. This leg, this big bump on the outside, is the greater trochanter. There is a teeny bump, it's not that teeny actually, it's pretty big, but there's a teeny bump in here called the lesser trochanter. You will never feel it in your entire life because it's under about that much muscle. And it's way up high here, so I just doubt you're ever going to feel it. But the iliacus comes from inside here and hooks to it. So I don't know if you can see this, but if it were to contract, it would flex your hip. The psoas major attaches here, to the inside of your lower back, and it too goes down to your lesser trochanter. And it too, if it flexed, would cause you to bend at the hip. These are hip flexors. And we care about them a lot for that reason. They're hip flexors. This is the reason why when you go to a personal trainer, he has you do stomach crunches instead of sit-ups. Sit-ups work your iliopsoas, iliacus major and your psoas. Your iliacus and your psoas major. Crunches work your abdominals. Crunches do this. Iliopsoas does this whole bending at my hip thing. Yeah? Maybe. Sort of. Ms. Lovitch, you have a very confused look on your face, which is okay. If that's your thinking face, I'm okay with it. But if that's your, I'm completely lost, what are you talking about, Tapscott face, you should tell me. Yes, Ms. McDowell.
I'm kind of confused as to what hip flexion looks like. Because I know that flexions typically, besides the knee, who's a turd, go in front. But how do you do like hip flexion? Because I can see like the spine and the femur, but I can't. What do you mean?
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking because my class right now that's getting ready to graduate was having a hard time with this today. I'm like, wow, this is really a hard concept. So let me show you. So it's hard to see because I'm wearing all black, but let's try to look at some movements here. Kind of holding this is my pubic symphysis here, and here's my sternum. All right, what am I doing right here? Yeah, I'm flexing, and what is moving? It's my abdominals are making me move, but what's moving? What joints are moving when I do this? What's allowing me to do that? What is bending?
It's not the SI joint. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you're leading me in the direction of like the hips, but I just don't see how.
Oh God, no! I'm not moving my hips at all. So we're on the same page. Don't worry. I'm not moving my hips. I'm moving my.
Your spine?
Yes. These 24 joints bend. They bend in all sorts of directions. And when my abdominals pull from my rib cage to here, I am flexing my spine. In a way, I'm flexing each of those 24 joints a tiny bit right now. Maybe not all 24 of them, but the point is, many of those little vertebrae are going, oh. So this is me bending my spine. This is actually me bending my spine. These are lateral flexions of my spine. These are front flexions. These are extensions of my spine. That's my spine. That's my spine. So hold on. So again, crunches, not a lot of movement. Look, I don't move a lot with a crunch, right? Flexions are in the hip joint. I mean, this was a flexion of the spine, but this, what I'm about to show you now, is a flexion of my hip. I'll give you two scenarios. That's a flexion of my hip, right? I bent at the hip, had nothing to do with my spine. I could do this actually and do a crunch. This is spine, this is hip. This is me falling over. This is hip, right? Hip, right? And then this is spine. That's hip. And this is hip too, when I bend at my hip. Now, what's confusing is most of us bend at our hip and our spine at the same time. Like, why wouldn't you? But the question is actions. Don't get confused with like what muscle causes the action and where the joint is going. We can argue about the muscles later. You're absolutely right. The abdominals let me crunch and other things let me bend at my hip. But the action happens, a flexion of my hip means I'm bending at my hip. This is the same, by the way, as this, believe it or not, basically. It's me bending at the hip joint. I'm only doing it on one hip joint here, but that's the same. So we're talking about
Those are both hip flexions, but it's just bilaterally instead of unilaterally. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you just said it better than me. But yes, that is what I'm saying. Yes. And I'm saying if I was laying on the floor and I lifted my legs up, or if I, yes. Anyway, yes, I am. Those are the same. Exactly what you said. I was doing bilaterally here. Watch, I'm going to do bilaterally here. Ready? Bilateral! I can do it that way too. They're the same thing. To my hip joint doesn't know any different. The fact is it bends in front either way. Whether I bring my upper body to it or my lower body to it, that is me bending at my hip joint. That is me bending at my hip joint, which is very different than bending at my spine. Cool?
So,
Both are
I mean,
flexions.
so that wouldn't be considered like a leg movement when you're doing that? I mean, even though it's accompanied with it?
Well, I don't know what you mean. Which one would be considered a leg movement? Do you mean the flexion of the hip?
Yeah.
So, are you feeling hung up on it? I don't mean it in a snarky way, but are you feeling hung up on the fact that, like, how do we talk about it? Should we talk about a flexion of the leg instead of calling it a flexion of the hip?
I mean, kind of, because it's harder to see.
Yeah, but look at it this way. Let's look at the board here really quick. By the way, everybody, I hope you do too, Miss McDowell. I'm glad we're spending time on this. This is a very challenging concept. Yes, Mr. Riedel, please.
Is it kind of like a tilt? Like a you're tilting?
Ah, damn it. I'm doing that too, and that is a flexion of the hip too. You're just a little bit ahead of me, but in a very good way. I'll get to that.
Okay.
So
Because you're going forward, so
Yep.
it's like a tilt because it's in the...
So, I'm going to draw a body on its side, and I want you to pretend, Miss McDowell, and everybody who's watching too, that this person is floating in outer space. There's a reason. So let's give them a foot with a little knee, with a hip, little spine, some ribs, a head, a nose. Okay, they don't get any arms, all right? This is why I became a massage teacher, because it was this or art school, and that wasn't working out. Okay, so this is their hip, though, which I often signify as kind of a triangle here. That's their hip. Okay. We usually talk about movements and what joint they involve. Because when we say things like flexion of the leg, well, the leg doesn't flex. We hope it doesn't flex. What flexes is a knee or a hip or an ankle. So if we say flexion of the leg, it's actually pretty confusing. Like, is it flexing at the ankle or the knee or the hip? So what we really do is talk about where it bent. And so here's the interesting thing. If our person laying down here brings their leg up like this, and there's a little foot out there, I can't draw it. This is in front of them, right? They're bringing it up like that. That's a flexion of the hip. But because this angle got smaller in front of them, that's what makes it a flexion. So, but let me ask you, if you could take this in your mind and put the leg back down and sit the person up some, there would still be a flexion of the hip. And if they're floating in outer space, they don't know whether they did this or this. They still bent at the same place. To their body, there's no difference. It seems very different to us because we live in a gravity-filled world, and there's a big difference between me bending over at my hip or lifting my leg up because I got gravity to deal with. But if I was floating in outer space, bending over and lifting both legs up would be the same result. They're both a flexion of my hip. No matter how I draw this, to my body in space at the hip, it feels no difference. It goes, okay, we're at 45 degrees. I don't care if the feet came over here or we came over there, we're here. Right? Like you don't necessarily know if I'm getting close to the camera or the camera's getting closer to me. The fact is the distance closed.
What is that actual name of that joint? I mean, I think
Acetabular femoral joint.
so. It's actually that joint that is moving there. So where the head of the femur is in that fossa, that's what's moving. That's the flexion. Is that what you're saying?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Okay.
I am 100% saying that I wish these weren't sawed off, but this is our person outer space. I am saying this is a ball and socket joint here, and you can either bend it here or bend this thing to it. But I'm telling you right now, what happened inside this joint was the same. Look at that is the same, right? It doesn't know whether your legs came to it or you came to your legs. The joint did the same thing. The joint flexed. The flexion occurred at the joint. That's where the bending happened.
I think I understand.
Yeah. And by the way, the same muscles would create the same thing. So the same muscles that would bring my legs up would also bring my torso to them. Because it's any muscles tied between these two things are going to, all the muscle does, if this guy's floating in space and he contracts his iliopsoas, he's going to do this. And we don't know what came to what. It doesn't matter. We just know this thing flexed. It got closer. But yes, we're talking about the thing at the joint. Yes.
Okay.
Now, Mr. Riedel took this one bold step forward, which I really admire. This part's a little trickier, but if we have a person here this is their hips. When they bend forward, their hips go forward. So if this person bends forward, like in another view here, these hips that were nice and straight will be like that. That's our person just bending forward. They're still bending at this joint, ma'am. That's how they're able to bend forward. They're bending at that joint. But look what happened to the hips. These are now anteriorly tilted hips. And I think this is what Mr. Riedel was getting at, which is really cool because flexing your hip anteriorly tilts your hip, since the hips kind of do this thing. And if we're doing it just as an exercise, like on the floor, that's fine. But if my hip flexors are actually short, I'm like that all the time. Except that my body's really smart, and it knows it can't hold my head out here like this. So do you know what it does? With an anterior tilted hip, it exaggerates the curves of the spine. That's the low back. It actually exaggerates the curves of the spine because my butt's way out here to get my head back over it because it's too hard to hold it out here. So an anteriorly tilted hip is the same thing as bilaterally bilaterally flexing at the hip or lifting both legs in outer space or whatever. They're coming together. The point is, this angle here closed. And I know that's hard to see, but it really did. It really closed. And it closed because of one thing only. The acetabular femoral joint. That's what went. There's no trick. It doesn't matter. Honestly, if you came to me and said, how did you get to here? I'd say we got a flexion of the hip. And if you said, well, did the hips come to the leg or the leg come to the hip? I'd be like, I have absolutely no idea. I don't know that. All I can tell you is it took a flexion to get here. Because in the real world, that looks different, but it's not. Those are just positions in space. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was actually really helpful for the sideline thing.
Yeah.
Sidetrack? Yeah.
Yeah, sideline, whatever, laying on the side, outer space thing. So anyway, great question, and Mr. Riedel, really good insight too. You're absolutely right. And we will talk ad nauseum in this class about hip flexors because they're very commonly tight muscles on our clients because when you sit at a desk, you tend to be anteriorly tilted. There's nothing wrong with that, but it allows your hip flexors to shorten. And then when you get up, you've got exaggerated curves in your back. And then you go see Miss McDowell and you say, my neck hurts. And it does. But she's smart enough to realize that maybe you're anteriorly tilted and your neck's sitting out here like this and there's actually nothing wrong with your neck. She rubs it anyway because she's smart and that's what you asked for. But then she works on your low back because that's bothering you. But now she goes to fix the problem. First two things, she was just working on symptoms to make you happy. So you'll come back. Now she works on your hip flexors so that you can get your butt back underneath you and stand up straight. And the hip flexors would cause you to be anteriorly tilted if they're shortened. Yeah. Yay! All right, good. Woo! Okay. So, and the most famous hip flexors are the iliacus and psoas major, the iliopsoas. Because they're deep inside you, and that's what they do. That's just kind of what they do. They grab this stuff and flex at the acetabular femoral joint, or the coxal joint, or the hip joint, or whatever you want to call that. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yes, ma'am. Miss Vincent.
So you would have to dig in their pelvis to get to them?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do people like that?
Oh my God. They love it. They're just, in fact, it's a reward. If you guys do really good in my class, I work on your, no, it's horrible. You're absolutely right. It's horrible. They hate it. And so let me answer that question, ma'am. Yes, you can. By the way, a good therapist can come in here and they actually put their hand kind of flat down here on the stomach, and they'll come in and they'll pin the muscle right here. They can't get all of it. They can't get up here and they can't get down here, but they can usually hit it right here. And they'll hold this down and they'll use it to like pin and stretch the muscle as they raise and lower your leg. It's one of the ways to release it. And it works pretty well. I don't like it. I think it takes me so long to get through your stomach and I'm really only hitting one place in the muscle. I don't like it. And the iliacus is inside here and it's really hard to get your fingers in here. You can get them in a little bit, but most people will kill you by now, right? What I like to do is just stretch them. So if you go behind them and pull the leg back and push the butt in, you stretch those muscles. And I know you stretch them because I just ripped them both off the body by doing that. So I like to stretch them. And what I do is force them into a lunge. And I'm happy to show you, Miss Vincent in lab, but I showed some of you this on our days when we were all together. Remember that move where I'd have you put your arm, I'd have you put a leg underneath their leg and push down on their glutes? That was us stretching out the iliopsoas. Anybody remember that? Was anybody here? Yeah, okay. Doesn't mean we won't do it again. I just meant, like, does it sound familiar? So anyway, Miss Vincent, muscles that are really hard to reach and really uncomfortable, I prefer to stretch. I rub most muscles because one is stretching actually takes a long time, even though I really believe in it. Really believe in it. But it takes a long time because you have to constantly be going, can you take a little bit more, Miss Vincent? Oh yeah, a little bit more. Okay, is that all right with you? And it just takes a long time. And then we got to hold it for 2 minutes if we want to make it really effective. And most clients tell me, most clients, not all, some hire entire stretching sessions and they love it. But I would honestly say that's 1 out of 100 clients in a way. Most clients want to be rubbed. They actually like the sensation of being rubbed and they'll tell you, I can stretch on my own. So I usually only stretch muscles that are hard to reach where it makes a whole lot more sense. And this one is one. This is the one that I stretch in almost every massage because I don't want to go messing to try to get inside your stomach and get to it. I don't think it's worth it. I think it's burny and painful and people don't like it. Yeah. So there you go. Good questions. Okay. And yes, Mr. Tate, sir.
So I vaguely remember that stretch. Do you mind demonstrating it again?
No, I don't mind. I don't mind, but I need to do it live and in person because here it'll mean nothing to you guys. Like it wouldn't mean anything. I don't think it'll mean anything on the camera. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
I'll need to come into your lab and show you.
Okay.
But the key to stretching any muscle, this works 100% of the time, is you do the opposite of its action. So if this muscle lifts the leg up, push the leg down. Right? I push their glutes in because it makes it work. It keeps them from engaging their lower back. I don't want them to start to hyper extend their lower back and stuff. Yeah. Anyway, sir, I will, but I'll have to come into your lab to show you. And I will attempt to do that tomorrow. 11. Cool. Awesome. Okay. Anybody else? We're doing good. These are good overviews. Again, we will study these muscles separately, but I want to give you some overviews and things to think about, and I really like the questions about what's flexion and all that kind of stuff to kind of get all that straight. Okay, so we really care a lot about hip flexors. You've got a lot of them. They can mess up your low back, all that kind of stuff. We talked about the quads. Let's go to the back. So, in back, you've got these obturator foramen and you've got these big things. This is not only, this bone is called the ischium. This bumpy part of the bone is called the ischial tuberosity. It's massive and it's very bumpy. And it's at the bottom of people's butts. When you massage up their leg, if you can do this without being invasive, you can actually hit this bone. And you kind of want to because that's the end of the hamstrings. I'll explain in 1 second. Yes, Mr. Tate, sir, please.
We can't see the skeleton.
Oh, you can't?
I can't, no.
Can you see my hand?
I can see your hand, yeah.
It's
I can
just,
see you.
it's just a bad view of the skeleton is what you're saying.
Yeah, is it just me or?
No, I'm sure it's a pretty bad view of the skeleton, sir. I don't think it's just you. But you can see...
I don't see the skeleton at all either.
Oh!
I see.
Maybe my screen gives me a different view than what your screen does.
I can see it. Maybe you guys don't have them pinned to your screen.
Yeah, you do want to pin me to your screen to make me as big as possible. Thank you, sir. Try that, Mr. Tate. Did that help? Pinning me to your screen?
No, I just turned I have you on my phone, so I just flipped it around.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am sorry, by the way. It's already hard to see it on a phone. It's probably really hard. Unfortunately. Miss Walker, did you have something else to say? I felt like Miss Walker T that you... Is that it?
No, I wasn't going to see it either, but yeah, I'm on my phone too, so that's probably why.
Okay. Yeah, sorry guys. That's small screen problems. I apologize, but... Next, you should be watching me on a big screen TV. I look really good in the theater. Is actually where I do my best work. So, this face blown up. Okay. So, these big hooks here that I'm literally grabbing onto are essentially where all your hamstrings hook to. So, this is important for two big reasons. But, our hamstrings basically hook to here. There's 3 hamstrings with 4 heads. 2 heads go off to this one side of the leg. Two heads go off to the other side of the leg. All right. Okay. So, everybody, this definitely means when the hamstrings contract, they will pull the leg up. They will cause a flexion of the knee. But they will also, because they're hooked to the hip here, and they can affect the acetabular-femoral joint and cause an extension of the leg. Now, if a flexion of the hip could cause an anterior tilt, an extension of the hip can cause a posterior tilt. So believe it or not, you really can pull on the back of these things with your hamstrings and actually rotate your hips backwards. Rotate your hips backwards. And there are some people that have posterior tilted hips from having too tight of hamstrings. And strangely enough, when you posteriorly tilt, your curves go away. And you actually don't want them to all go away. You want some nice soft curves. And if they go away, you become completely like military back and you've got no shock absorption there, and that can be a problem too. So I want you to recognize that this is, by the way, why people work their hamstrings with stiff-legged deadlifts. Because, again, this is me beating a dead horse here, Miss McDowell, but it's worth beating on this one. Just like I made this big hoopla with you about the fact that there's no difference between me bending at my hip and lifting my leg up, right? The same is true behind me, if we're talking about my hip. There's no difference to me bringing my hip back or me bending back at my hip joint. I get it that some of this is spine. I'm sorry, I don't have that much control, but the point is that action at the hip is a posterior tilt for that reason. And so, yes, we care about these muscles because they are powerful drivers of the leg, and they're amazing, and they allow you to squat and run and jump and just look cool. But we also care about them because they all affect pelvic tilt, and that is the basis of your 24 domino stacked tower of your spine. And if any of you, if I said, hey, you know, you really like your house, do you mind if I take the foundation and tilt it just an inch on this side on your house? I suspect you'd all say, no. You can move that old couch in here, you can repaint that wall, but don't mess with the foundation, because that's just asking for trouble. That's what happens with people's backs. Their hips get off just a little bit, and the back's got to compensate for that all the way up. So this is the other reason we care about leg muscles. And really good massage therapists start to see the legs as part of back problems and stuff like that. They actually start to put them together. In fact, back problems might be back problems, but back problems are usually back symptoms. Back and neck problems are usually back and neck symptoms of pelvic problems and foot problems and leg problems. Not always, but it's not uncommon at all. At all. Right? Just like, I'm sorry I use this analogy a lot, but it's worth saying again. If you saw cracks in the classroom wall here behind me, the first thing we might do is just plaster them over and paint them. That's not unreasonable. But if they kept reappearing, eventually you'd say, I think there's a foundation problem here. The problem is actually not in the wall. And I'd sit there and go, but there's cracks in the wall. And you'd say, Tapscott, I know there's cracks in the wall, but that's because of the foundation. And we're doing the same thing here with backs, if that makes sense. Yeah? Cool. It's neat because, you know, when you work on an area and you're like, I've run out of stuff to work on, not with this approach to massage therapy. There's always something where you're like, well, if that was a little bit off, that could be a problem. This is why I do weird things in massage, like when I'm stumped, which happens a lot. When I'm stumped and I'm like, I really don't know what else to do, I'll work on people's feet. Because I guarantee you if there's a problem in your feet, there's a problem all the way upstairs. So sometimes just when I run out of stuff, I'm like, let's try the feet. Because they're foundational. And all it takes is a 1 degree little difference in your feet and the top of the tower is way off. So looking at people's feet, looking at their pelvic tilts, these are not bad areas to look at when we're having a hard time figuring out what caused a problem. Because all I got to do with this 10-pound head is get it just a little bit forward, and now I'm going to have neck problems tomorrow. And so the question is, why is it forward? Because my body wants it back. It does this naturally. But maybe it's forward because some other problems down below. Okay, so that explains hamstrings. And then really quickly, I just want to show you about the adductors, just so we have all this in our minds before we go into muscles in the next couple of days and things like that in these specific areas. Kind of give you a way to kind of play with this. All right. So in between the legs, we've got the adductors. Yeah. Let me ask you a question. How many hamstrings are there? Anybody? 3. Thank you. How many quads are there? 4. How many adductors are there? And they make up a large percentage of your leg. It's funny because we always go to the gym and we're like, I'm going to work my hamstrings or my glutes or whatever we say are adductors, but your adductors actually have a lot to do. They have a lot to do with you getting up off the ground because you kind of squeeze your legs together to get up. All right, so we got 5 adductors and just a couple of points I want to make about the adductors, and then we'll wrap this up and do a little homework and get you out of here. One thing is, we are now dealing with 3-dimensional bodies. So this is really hard to explain, but I want you to see it once here. Your leg is deep. So all your adductors are on your medial side. They are between your legs. But some are in the medial side up front, and some are on the medial side in back. I don't mean behind your leg. I still mean on the medial side, but further back. There's enough room for multiple stuff to be stacked up here. And the adductor magnus is the one that's most back. It's huge, really huge. Kind of looks something like this. Actually, even more. Sorry, everybody. Hold on. So hopefully you can see this blue is in back. It's on the medial leg, right? You can see that it's on the medial part of the leg here, right? The other adductors, which I'm going to do in red here, actually go in front of it. So things like the pectineus and brevis and longus and this isn't quite accurate, but gracilis. It goes way down here. They too are on your middle thigh. You can rub your middle thigh and rub all these, but they lay on top. They are more in front of the adductor magnus. So if I'm rubbing the back of somebody's leg, I'm actually rubbing all their hamstrings and their adductor magnus a little bit. If I'm rubbing the front of their leg, I'm rubbing their quads and all their other adductors. If I'm rubbing the middle of their leg, I'm hitting all their adductors. But some are more in back and some are more in front. The adductor magnus is so far in back that some people even consider it to be kind of like a hamstring helper. And that's not super inaccurate at all. Because it's so far back, it can actually pull your leg back a little bit. Even though its main job is to adduct, to pull your thighs together. Yay! All right, so if you felt lost during some of that or you couldn't see all that, don't worry, right? This is the layered approach we take to doing stuff in here, and it works very well. So, but we want to give you an overview before we go in and talk about the quads, the deep six, all this kind of stuff. So, tonight you've got a few more little landmarks to do, and you've got a matching, which is the end of chapter questions for chapter 28 on the respiratory system, which is the way you get oxygen in your body, and the circulatory system takes the oxygen around your body, and then blow out the carbon dioxide, and then repeat. So anyway, the respiratory system is your lungs. Some people call the respiratory system, in fact, most people call the respiratory system your pulmonary system. Pulmonary means lungs. So most people, I don't know why your book doesn't do this, but they actually study the pulmonary and the cardiovascular together because they work so closely together. But anyway, your lungs are the carburetor for your body. That's what you're going to be studying, how you actually get in oxygen. You're going to find out it's all about surface area, and just like your digestive system and everything else in your body. So that's there, and like I said, a small little test here. They're both released. You have time to work on them right now. I encourage you to do so. And I'm here to answer questions, and I'll check in with you here in a little bit.